Good evening. This is the Village of Lake Bluff Historic Preservation Commission, our regular meeting, August 8th, 2018. We have a number of items on our agenda. The first is the roll call, please.
Member Bergman. Here. Member Church.
Here.
Member Nickel.
Here.
Member Richardson.
Here.
Member Liebold is absent. Vice Chair Hunter.
Here.
Chair Kraus.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Second item is the consideration of the July 11th, 2018 meeting minutes. They were in our packet and previously distributed. Do we have any questions, corrections, additions?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
Second.
Any additional discussion? All in favor of accepting the draft minutes of July 11, 2018 meeting as presented, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are passed. Agenda item number 3, non-agenda items and visitors. It is the policy of all of the public bodies in the village to allocate 15 minutes at the beginning of every public meeting for individuals who are in the audience who would like to address the commission on a subject that is not on tonight's agenda and is within the purview of, in this case, the Historic Preservation Commission. Is there anyone who would so wish to address the commission? No one. We'll go on to agenda item number 4. Agenda item number 4 is consideration of a significant demolition review for a property of 419 East Prospect Avenue. The village is in receipt of a building permit application seeking substantial alteration, actually demolition, to the structure at 419 East Prospect Avenue. It is considered a significant demolition pursuant to Village Building Code and requires review by the Historic Preservation Commission before the permit is issued. This is part of the building code of the village. It identifies any structure that is more than 50 years old to go before this review process. So the purpose of this discussion tonight is to gather information about the subject property, to hear from the applicant and any individuals from the village who would wish to present before the commission, and to have discussion among the commission about what our next steps might be regarding this particular issue. Would you have additional introductory comments?
Certainly. So just to expand a little bit on that, Chair Kraus, for those of you not familiar with the process, we have a relatively narrow scope of what we're trying to do tonight. This commission isn't responsible for reviewing every demolition in the village. It just reviews those for buildings over 50 years old. It's not responsible for all the things that come along with doing a demolition. It's just responsible for determining solely, principally, I should say, if this structure is worthy of landmark consideration, and if so, allowing time for one of the entities that can submit a landmark application to do so. So we don't do design review here. We don't worry about things like drainage or what a new house will look like at this stage. We're really here worrying about the existing structure and its merits under landmarking. To give a brief history, I know the applicant, Bob Helly, is here to speak a little bit to you as well. As a brief history again, this project, I guess we should say this property, first came to our attention at the village here in July of 2018. At that time, Mr. Helly came to the Plan Commission Zoning Board of Appeals looking to discuss the idea of a subdivision, keeping the original section of the house. This house has additions over the years, but keeping the original form of the house on one lot, creating a new buildable lot to build a separate house in. I'm sure he'll speak to the reasons for seeking that. After that workshop, he chose not to proceed. Later that year in November, he came forward with a plan that that contemplated a fairly large addition to the house, and again, removing those later additions. This group approved it, but unfortunately, as I understand it, for economic reasons, he chose not to continue with that plan. Here last month, Mr. Helly came before the Plan Commission with the subdivision proposal again, and that was voted down by the Plan Commission, and so now he comes to us for a significant demolition review. So that's sort of the history of how we got here.
Okay. Any questions from the commissioners?
Great.
Okay. Mr. Helly, if you would. Thank you for coming.
Thank you and good evening. I'm Bob Helly. I think
A little bit.
Thank you. I think Glenn summarized the history pretty well. I think that you first said July 18. I think it was actually July 17 that we...
I apologize, yes.
Yes, we appeared before courtesy review of Plan Commission suggesting that we subdivide the lot. That was not received favorably at the end of that Plan Commission meeting. So we then chose to look at trying to incorporate the existing house into a house that would more meet our needs. Unfortunately, it was an error on our part to bring that in too soon before we had pricing on that design, and pricing on that was just exorbitant. There were what we felt were germane and actionable questions brought up in the original Plan Commission hearing, most notably that we were creating a flag lot, so we tried to address that in the subsequent proposal last month. Since that proposal was rejected, we are at a point where we've tried to find ways to incorporate the house and also create a house that meets our needs. It is not possible, in our opinion, and therefore we're submitting the demolition review. I think that kind of summarizes it.
So I've been serving on village boards for a long time, a variety of different roles, as you know. One of my least favorite activities is to sit through hearings like this, where a property owner has made a decision, which is property owner's right, to go a different direction with a particular property. And you have spent almost a year and a half in looking through alternatives. I wish there were other alternatives, and that's one of the things that we want to talk about tonight, and one of the things that we do need to begin to investigate. As Glenn had said, our review here is fairly narrow. It is to determine whether or not the structure potentially satisfies landmark criteria, status for landmarking. This isn't a decision around landmarking. This is a discussion around whether the structure potentially is eligible for landmarking. The ordinance has a demolition review specifically to allow more sets of eyes on the demolition to look at potentially other options or other discussions. You've done a lot of that with a lot of other boards already. But just to level set for the audience, what we're looking to do today is really to gather information around the subject property and make a determination as to whether we think that this is potentially an eligible landmark. And I'd like to proceed with that. We'd love to get comments from the audience. I would ask your indulgence if, when we're finished with that part of the discussion, I would also like to expand this if you agree, to get some sense of what you're intending on the property. I know you have had some plans. They've shifted over time, so it would be helpful in the context of the discussion to get a sense of that.
I'm not able to comment on what we proposed. There's a very well-written zoning ordinance for the site. We will fully comply with that zoning ordinance. My understanding is anything we design has to go through the Architectural Review Committee.
Does not have to.
That's not the case? Well, then we'll fully comply with the zoning ordinance. We will continue to work with Ed Deegan, who's a local architect here, who actually is on the Architectural Review Committee. But beyond that, I'm not willing to comment.
Okay. We would hope that depending on what direction this goes, that you would take advantage of some of the expertise that exists within the village as you think about what an ultimate design might look like and placement on the lot. But certainly that is under current village protocol. That is not required. That is something that we would encourage you to do, to take advantage of the expertise that is there.
I mean, just curious, of which expertise, at staff, at village staff, or at the historical museum? I mean, I'm certainly open to.
Part of it would be this body, part of it would be the folks on the architectural review board. It would really be much more about the replacement than
I see.
what is there. Another reason for the delay right here is so that we make sure that the structure, if it is going to be torn down, that structure is appropriately documented inside and out, so that we have a historical record of what was there.
Yeah.
I was going to do this later, but let me jump ahead now. So the lore in the village is that that house was built with bricks from the Close brickyard. The Close family is one of the original settlers in Lake Bluff. That's been the lore. That's what I had heard when I moved into the village. We've got some information that suggests that's not correct, and we need to get to the bottom of that. And again, that's a perfect reason for having a demolition delay, is so that we understand.
And we're certainly comfortable. I've actually, in my professional life, I've gone through processes like this where we've had to remove old structures, and the documentation process is certainly acceptable. And to your point directly, in speaking, and your predecessor as chair of this board, she was very helpful when we talked with her at the museum, and my understanding is the Clo brick was a yellow brick. Both Ed and I have a lot of experience with yellow, likely unfired brick, both of us being Notre Dame graduates, which is typical down there. So we did a little investigating, removing some of the old stucco on it. The brick that's underneath there is Chicago Common.
Okay. All right, other questions of the petition?
I just have a question, a general question. It seems to me, if I read some of this information, that the foundation in the basement, so-called whatever basement is somewhat marginal.
It's a crawl space under so the house, as you know from the packet, is several different iterations, or several different pieces. There's the main body of the house, which runs north-south with a gable roof. That's the original structure, and that's a brick load-bearing structure, and has a brick foundation, which is failing. It would require shoring and really probably a fair amount of replacement. The corner, if you were to see the living room of the house, the northeast corner of the floor is down probably 2-3 inches and sagging. And a previous owner had tried to shore that with some TGI joists in that space. So that there's been efforts to support that floor, but it's the foundation is somewhat crumbling, and that's not atypical for a brick foundation of this vintage. The other portions of the house, the leg that goes to the west, looks very similar in character to the main body, is a later addition because it's frame construction and it's on a concrete foundation. And then the portion no one worries about is the 60s addition, 70s addition to the south.
Okay.
Yesterday, I asked our assistant at the Lake Forest History, or Lake Bluff History Museum, if she could look into some of the land records regarding the building. And she did not have much time to look at things, but she was able to ascertain that the property was owned by Reverend Dr. Jeffries in the 1880s, and was then owned by a Mrs. Peacock in 1897 and 1898. And that's important because at that point, it's showing a $300 assessed valuation, which indicates that that's about the time that the house was built. And so there is if Dr. Jeffries is part of the Methodist Camp Meeting Association, and I'm told that we're pretty certain that he is, then there may be a significant social history there that we need to take a look at. And I don't have much information beyond what I've just told you at this point. Lindy only had, an hour this morning to go look in the, and her methodology is to search through the records at the Lake County Courthouse. And that was the preliminary information she was able to come up with. And she was able to confirm that there was a Dr. Jeffries, or Reverend Jeffries, at the Methodist, in the Methodist Camp Meeting Association at that time. So there is some social history there to be investigated,
And more to find out.
and, yes. And
Any other preliminary questions? Thank you. Would invite members of the audience who would like to address the commission.
My name is Ed Wynn, and I live at 502 East
Thanks.
Prospect.
If you could use the,
So my name is Ed Wynn. Nice to meet everyone. I live at 502 East Prospect, which is directly across the street diagonally from the subject property. I have prepared comments, but I wanted to start with two contextual issues based on the discussion so far. The first is, I'm going to respectfully disagree with Mr. Cole that the commission's role is limited to landmark status. As the comments I submitted over the weekend demonstrate, the applicable municipal code section does have other provisions other than the one that relates to landmark, and I know there may be a disagreement about that, but I want to note that for the record. The second thing, which I think is also noteworthy in context before I begin my prepared comments, which will be relatively brief other than a presentation I want to show, is that I find it amazing that the applicant refuses without reason to respond to the request of the chair of this commission for the planned development of this site. The applicant, based on my review of the record, has presented two sets of plans to this commission or other commissions in the village, and if he were doing that to gain approval from this commission or another body of Lake Bluff, I don't understand why he would fail to do that here, and I think it's appropriate to ask why. So with those two matters out of the way, I believe the following from this record. The facts lead to just one conclusion. The applicant, who is a licensed contractor, a very experienced one by his own statement, bought 419 East Prospect with the intent of either demolishing it to construct a mini mansion or to build two houses on the property and make an enormous profit from his purchase. How do we know this? Well, there really are only two possibilities. The first possibility is the conclusion I just stated. The second one is that the applicant intended to live in the home with his family without demolishing the home. The second possibility, as we'll see in just a couple minutes, lacks any factual basis, and quite frankly, it defies logic. Here's why. One, the applicant is a long-time licensed, highly experienced contractor. Two, any reasonably competent licensed contractor, like the applicant, would have known to have had an inspection of the home which he and his family intended to purchase and live in. Number three, any reasonably competent licensed contractor, like the applicant, would have inspected the home and known, at a very minimum, the materials of which it was constructed, and especially whether the foundation materials prevented living in or remodeling the home. Four, any reasonably competent inspector hired by the licensed contractor would have discovered whether the foundation materials prevented living in the home or remodeling it. Five, a reasonably competent architect like Mr. Deegan should have known before he represented to this commission and other bodies of this village that the existing home could be remodeled and preserved. He should have known that the foundations could support this construction and support the extensive plans he presented to this body and others, and whether in fact those plans could be effectuated. Six, there would have been absolutely no reason at all for the applicant to ever have proposed subdividing the property into two parcels to create two homes, one of 2,000 square feet, the other of 3,000 square feet, since applicant has stated in the materials you have in your packet tonight that he needs a home of 5,000 square feet to accommodate his family. Seven, there would have been absolutely no reason at all for applicant to have ever proposed subdividing a property if his intent were not to profit from the purchase of the property rather than to use it exclusively as his own home. So it follows that applicant has never had an intent other than to demolish this home. And even if he did have such an intent, and he were just negligent in purchasing a home without an inspection, hiring an architect who was negligent and not realizing the home's foundation was allegedly crumbling, and again, I point, we really don't have any evidence of that in the record here in this proceeding. Applicant is now asking to foist the cost of its own negligence on the neighbors and the community at whole to serve his own individual economic interest, because now the applicant claims it cost too much to remodel the existing home on the property. The commission, however, must represent the public interest and not individual economic interest. We understand the commission has three options in this case. The first option, terminate the review period. That will effectively mean the home can be demolished virtually immediately. Second, do nothing and the demolition will occur on or after October 16th. And the third option, extend the period for further consideration. Based on the current record, the commission cannot lawfully exercise the first two options for the reasons I set out in our comments. The reasons for this, though, I will summarize very clearly and simply. One, the record contains inconsistent and unsupported positions of applicant that have to be resolved before the commission can act or choose not to act in this matter. Two, the commission and other authorized entities have not been afforded an opportunity to provide evidence that the site is a landmark, even if the home on the site is not. Three, there are significant concerns in the record about the proposed demolition's effect on neighboring historic homes. And I make that point very precisely and clearly. I understand that it is not this commission's jurisdiction to get into environmental matters. However, it is this commission's jurisdiction to protect the history and the traditional architecture of this village, and to the extent that demolition of this home could negatively affect my home and the surrounding historic homes, many of which are distinguished home award winners, it is properly before this commission. Four, there are significant concerns completely unaddressed in the record that the environmental harm to neighbors and neighboring historic homes, and again, I emphasize historic homes. Five, and based on the logic that we talked about above, the only way the commission can choose one of the first two options is if it failed its mission and duty to the residents of Lake Bluff and allows, without any evidence or even requesting supporting evidence about the foundation issues, the private economic interest of a prospective resident of Lake Bluff, and allows that to trump the collective public interest of longstanding current residents of Lake Bluff. Even if the commission it were appropriate for the commission to consider economic interest, if it exercises either of the first two options, it is discriminatorily considering only the economic interests of the applicant, a single prospective resident, and not those of many current residents, like those here tonight, who have invested millions of dollars in the heritage and architectural preservation of Lake Bluff. Now, I'll be absolutely clear, I've gone through the minutes, I've gone through the packets over the last year or so, and I commend the commission for their good intent regarding preserving the history and architecture of Lake Bluff. I see that particularly in the minutes in the May 2018 meeting. However, good intent is not enough. That same set of minutes reflects that, by the commission's own admission, it's not doing the job it needs to be doing with regard to historic preservation in the village. Commissioner Church, I'll focus on your comments, which I saw in that record. You said that the commission's loss column is longer than its accomplishments column. Now, I remember when my son was one of your students at Lake Forest High School, a long time ago. As I recall, a score of less than 50% wasn't a passing grade.
It certainly wasn't.
Allowing 419 East Prospect to be demolished will only add yet another loss. Now I'd like to show the presentation that demonstrates this very clearly. It provides maybe perhaps another scorecard. Now, Glenn, can you help me with this?
John will help you out
John,
with
can you
that.
help me with this? Thank you, John. So as background, and I'm just going to let this go up screen by screen.
in the mic, so.
I'm going to let this just go screen by screen because, as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But the background is I went, is it up on the screen? Okay, there we go. I went through the East Lake Bluff area, and I took pictures of different homes. And so this is a presentation, this or that. So you're going to see in the first part of the presentation, historic homes that I think fit the character of the village. And in the second part, those that don't, and then you're going to see them all together. And as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, so no further ado. John, can we take that sideline off or make it full screen? There we go, perfect.
You have a clicker there as well, if that's your
All right, thank
preference.
you. The only comment I'll make about this one is it's also on a corner lot, actually the next corner lot from the applicant's home. I think it provides a very good example of what a remodeled and added home could look like, both as to how it sits on the site, as well as preserving the existing architecture.
466 Alliston.
This home, as I understand it, once belonged to Mr. Villay.
Elmer Vliet.
This is our home. This is an example of a home that was demolished, but rebuilt in the style of the prior home. I think many of you are familiar with it.
Why is that bouncing so much?
We're getting a shock absorber soon to help. It's secured to the wall, and this being an
Okay.
old building, it sort of picks up a little, breathes a little bit.
Yeah,
So
trying
we
to hold it
apologize.
down, but I don't think that's going to help.
Okay.
Well, it's just
When
you.
the train goes by.
We didn't see it.
It's just like my house,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
This is another Distinguished Home Award winner. One immediately adjoining it, which is just behind our home.
Sleeters.
This is an example of a home that was demolished and rebuilt in a style that I think improved on the old style and incorporated even greater period elements. I know they spared not much expense on that property.
If you want to hold on just 1 second here.
Absolutely, thank you.
Just going to see if letting that fan sit for a second is going to help us out.
Oh, I think the fan may be causing that, yeah.
Vibration.
No one's moving, so I apologize. Nope,
Nope.
nope, that wasn't very helpful.
Exceed your vision.
Exceed your vision.
I apologize for that.
No, that's our issue. Nobody move. Nobody breathe.
Yeah.
This is another one that was demolition and rebuilt,
Yeah.
a Distinguished Home Award winner. This is one that recently was significantly added to and added consistent with the structure. It's a house we all know. Another one. Even this one. or that? The next two homes replace the one that was torn down, unfortunately, and I know some of you or all of you are familiar with that. The one next to it. The prior one, I believe, is where the gentleman who's in charge of the Bears, I think, lives there, in that particular home.
The previous one.
But the previous one, yes. This is one that was newly constructed. Another one? Another new construction one? So the question is this: do you want this? Or do you want that? Choice is simple. Are the commission and the village going to start fulfilling their legally required obligations to protect the history and architecture of Lake Bluff? Or are we going to continue down the current path of making Lake Bluff a community of teardowns and tract-style, undistinguished homes to appease current buyer fads, ignoring the multi-century history of the village? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. Others wishing to present or comment? I'll note for the record that we've received a number of emails and letters. Those have been in our packet or at the dais, and all of these will become part of the record of tonight's proceeding. No one else? Questions from the commissioners?
I have one for Mr. Hallett. Do you currently live in the home?
No, we do not.
Okay. Have you lived in it at all?
No, my stepson and his fiancee are living there.
Do you live in Lake Bluff?
No, we currently live in Grays Lake.
And your contracting business is in Grays Lake?
I am an architect. I've been a licensed architect for almost 30 years. I've been a commercial real estate developer for almost 20 years. I am not a general contractor.
Okay.
However, I do appreciate being highly competent.
If I can say something quick. One thing I would just advise is, while it may be good, interesting information about where the applicant for the demolition permit lives, I would just caution you that is not a factor in terms of your consideration tonight. And just would like to say that for the record, as you make your determination, that property owners throughout the village, regardless of where they may actually reside, have the same rights.
Right.
Could I just make a comment about that one of the, probably the chief difficulty that we have as members of this commission is the tension between owners' rights and historic preservation. That is a given in a situation like this. And I can only speak for myself. I would very much hate to see this house go down. I think this is a quintessential Lake Bluff home. It's set on a nice-sized lot with lots of space around it. I have never been inside this home, but I have seen homes that are in much worse condition than this brought back to beautiful, very livable modern homes. And I would just hope that someone would have the foresight to think about doing that before they purchase a house like this.
We did our due diligence when we purchased this house. We did our due diligence with the village on what the possibility of landmarking this house would be. We did, later, after owning the lot, come to the conclusion that it would better serve our needs if we could have two houses with the size of our family and the age of our kids. But that was rejected. So we are at the situation where we need to build a house that will meet the needs of our family as it stands today. This house is poorly sited. The lots underneath the house were the original 25-foot camp lots. So if you really want a historic precedent, go to a 25-foot lot. The house, history is a moving thing. And I'll only use the example of the Rickery in downtown Chicago, which you might be familiar with. It's probably my favorite building. It was designed by John Wellborn Root, went up in the late 19th century. In the 1980s, they had to decide how they were going to renovate that building, especially the main lobby. They wanted to remove a bad 1970s remodeling and go back to the original Root design. Seems a fairly obvious thing to do. However, the previous renovation was done by Frank Lloyd Wright. So my only point in that is that there's several different historical precedents on this lot, not just a brick house that's been built and then been added onto over the years.
Point well taken, thank you.
Thank you.
So, I actually lived across the street from your house for about 12 years at 412 East Prospect, one of those little 25-foot lots, and had a family there. And while it didn't necessarily serve today's great big kitchens and family rooms and things, it was a lovely house to live in, and it was a lovely neighborhood, and still is. The thing that a couple of things. It's not just the brick building, it's the neighborhood. It's the neighbors, it's the activities that happened in the neighborhood. That's part of the history as well. And that's why we consider all the different parts of being historical. And I'll just say, for one, I'm very much in favor of a delay on this property while we can take a better look at it.
And I agree with Sherry that it's important to look at the individual structures as well as the neighborhood. And I do think that this home is a wonderful reflection of the homes that were built at that point in time in the history of Lake Bluff. And I think it's important to recognize that. I'm sure it's the only one left in the community that reflects that type of building that was built at that point in time. And so I think that's important to look at. And going along with what other people have said, it's important too to look at Prospect. I mean, Prospect's very much like a lot of other streets, but that little area, I was walking down it the other day, is filled with different types of historic homes. There are very few homes that have been demolished. People have spent time and energy to maintain and preserve their homes, and that's what attracted you to the community, to that area, is the charming, historic nature of that street and that block. And unfortunately, people who are attracted to the community because of all of those factors then proceed to chip away at that. I hope that the home and that area and that block can be preserved, so I won't be in favor of proceeding with demolition.
Other comments?
This part of town, this particular block on Prospect is part of Lake Bluff's Methodist DNA. This goes back to the beginning of the village. The reason why your house faces east is not so that it can watch the sunrise. The house faces east because it looks into what used to be the tabernacle. Now, this gentleman over here who put on this elegant slideshow earlier lives in a house that's across the street from where there used to stand a 5-story hotel that supported the tabernacle. The reason why his house is 40 or 50 years newer than the house that you have is that it took that long for that particular block to develop. But this whole neighborhood is full of Methodist houses that have a great deal of social significance to us. Down the street are the 3 or 4 camp meeting houses, the last of the original camp meeting houses, the little 25-footers. You got the thing, you bought the thing, it came to you in raw wood form, and you had to paint your own house. And they were summer houses. And according to the material out of the Vliet book, sometimes the outhouse was not only in the backyard, the outhouse was down the street.
As was the kitchen.
And part of Lake Bluff's history at that time was that you took your meals at meeting houses. And so that there were various houses that they were called hotels, but really they were just large homes. But you would have a dining plan that you subscribed to, and then slept in your little cottage.
We've come full circle.
We've come full circle. You know, we're back to Airbnb. One of the other houses that was shown in the slideshow is at 402 Prospect. That is another one of the homes that was built by ministers in town. And just a little bit further west of that is a red stick house that was built by Solomon Thatcher, who was the original real estate developer in town and was pretty much selling lots. Only you had to be a Methodist to get in town.
Solomon Thatcher was a minister in River Forest originally,
Yep.
where I grew up.
Right, and then he left the River Forest group
Moved here.
and came up here and moved up here and had a substantial number of lots. This whole street is just a big part of Lake Bluff's DNA. If what Lindy came up with this morning was that it was owned by Reverend Jeffries, it's right smack in the middle of the DNA. Now, I was talking with Steve Kraus before the meeting began. His house backs up onto 2 houses on Prospect at the far end, on what would be the east end of the tabernacle. The cottages there are known as the Swift cottages, and they're 2 small stucco cottages. The father built one house, the son built the next house. The father was, by the way, Gustav Swift, who founded the Swift Meatpacking Company. But his house has a porch on it that faces west. And you think being 2 blocks from the lake, you'd want to have a porch that looked to the lake. No, his house faced to the west because there's a horse right-of-way down that particular part of Simpson, and he wanted his house to look into the tabernacle property. All of the houses in this part of town are part of our DNA.
That's not correct.
You need to come and spend some time in Lake Bluff.
I have
Come and spend some time here.
spent a great deal of time here, and
You spent a
and
year.
I've been coming to Lake Bluff for 30 years. You are correct that there are several houses that go back in that age. You are incorrect that they are all the case. The house immediately to our south is a new construction that required the demolition of a historic structure.
Yes?
The house,
We asked them not to tear that house down.
the house 1 block east on the north side is a 1970s at best northeast corner, 1 block east of us.
Well, I
It's
don't know.
a red brick. It's not distinguished except that it's just big and square. You have several interventions that have been made in these, some sensitive, some not.
That's absolutely correct.
And as I mentioned before, the history underneath that house was 25-foot lots, which were originally camp lots. This house sprawls across two of those lots. So it itself doesn't respect the original history that was there, that was part of the Methodist camp.
Well, of course it would.
Pick your history.
It's built there to be part of the camp community.
No, the camp community envisioned 25-foot lots. It was a later date. Pick your history. That's the point. There are several
History is right in front of you.
historical and competing elements there.
I think, yes, there are. The core of that house being as old as it is, though, it is intrinsically part of the camp meeting philosophy, whether or not it's on a 25-foot line or not. I think we're moving beyond. Bob, do you have any?
I'm just recalling the last time we saw a presentation made by Ed Deegan of what I understand was to be a series of buildings that were sort of intergenerational living situation. And we all thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to afford it.
And, in hindsight, you look at that and say, well, but I'm trying to think of the options that you're faced with, that this board is faced with. Because the intent of where you started, I'm sure you knew that the foundation of and you were going to remodel that house, so, all that kind of stuff isn't sort of germane. It's not like it was a surprise.
No, I mean, we did our due diligence.
Right, yeah. It is a very well-respected architect and a very good architect, and he sits on my board, and anyway, that's beside the point, but I have a lot of confidence in where he's going to go with whatever you folks decide to do or not do. But anyway, I'm looking at, I've been in that house, but not for 40 years. There used to be a family named Swan that lived in that house, and they had the biggest 4th of July party on that lawn, and it was, there was like hundreds of people there, and Skip sat there and made Bloody Marys until nobody could stand. But anyway, it's...
part of Lake Bluff history.
That was part of that's the social part of that lawn. But, they moved out of town about 35 years ago. So, but that, again, is neither here nor there. My question is, kind of to myself, what are your options now? We said, well, you've got to save the house and put it back together. My recollection of having been in that house, and it had been sort of remodeled on the inside, it's tiny. It's really small. It'd be a great bachelor house, and that's about the end of it. It's somebody that can do stairs.
Yeah, those stairs are quite steep.
Yeah, so it's I'm kind of rambling around because I'm not quite sure what the options are. For this group is, if we say, no, you can't tear it down, on one hand, that's taking of your land. Nobody is going to buy it based on the previous circumstances now, I don't think. I actually thought what the PCZBA rejected was maybe the best use, because that saved everything. But that's not our situation here. So I'm in a dilemma. I don't think that there's a big front yard that maybe has some history of it. Pretty soon, that starts to wear kind of thin to me. Whether it was part of the camp meeting house or not, it's not the claw brick, so, whatever date that puts it at. You said it looked like 1880. So I'm just sort of rambling around because I'm not sure where we need to go with this. And I don't know what the options are for us or for you.
I appreciate your comments, and I don't think we would have been going through this process for a full year if there was, a very clear cut. I've renovated 3 buildings with my own hands that were of the same era as this house. 2 houses in Lakeview and an 8-unit apartment building in Lakeview in Chicago, all from the 1880s. Beautiful buildings, and my opinion have far more architectural value than this house. But the point being, you know, if something's old, it's worth spending some time and considering preserving it. And if, you know, this, I can tell what the sense of the committee is. I think you would have a very difficult time landmarking this house over the owner's objections. But if the committee chooses, that's certainly within its right to delay the demolition, and wants to have the house fully documented, there's certainly no objection to that.
I have some comments, but I think we have two other people who wanted to speak, and then appreciate if you would come back when we're...
My name is Ann Caldwell. I hadn't planned to speak, but I'm inspired. I live around the corner at 400 Ravine Avenue. It's also a historic home. It's built on, I believe, 3 25-foot lots. It was built by one of the first village presidents in 1890, I believe. I've lived in Lake Bluff now for almost 30 years, and what you all vocalized speaks to me as well of the value that those of us that live in this, especially in this particular quadrant of Lake Bluff, the value that we put on the history of this community. It's why we chose it, it's why we love it, and it's why those of us who own old homes spend the time and precious money and care and love to preserve them, not necessarily for our financial gain. It's usually the opposite, but for the love of the old homes, the stories they tell, the history behind them, the honoring the families that also loved those homes and lived in those homes. When you drive into Lake Bluff from Lake Forest on Moffett Road, that particular intersection is the first residential intersection you get to in East Lake Bluff, and it tells its story for those who are entering our town from that direction for the first time. It's a pretty significant intersection. There was a mistake made on one of the corners of that intersection, in my opinion, back in the 1980s, I think, when a very large home was built on the northwest corner. It's a fairly attractive home, but it caused a lot of consternation when it went up, and also replaced a significantly historical home on that site, and it was much larger than the neighboring properties, and it sort of dwarfed them and put in place a slight imbalance that caused some concern back then. I remember that. The house in question has a couple of sister houses in Lake Forest that I think should be looked into. They were both built of the same style. They had the same windows, the same lintels, the same lines. One is at, I believe the address is 1240 Sheridan Road. It's just south of the Sheridan School. It was at one point, I believe, also picked up, set on top of a full basement. An addition was added, a front porch, and it looks beautiful. It really is a beautiful home. There's another one on East Westminster, just east of the railroad tracks, between McKinley and the Church of the Holy Spirit. It was originally a school. Somewhere else in town was picked up and moved to that site, and a second story was added to it. But it has the same architectural features, and I think it might have been built by the same architect. I know Ed Deegan, and I respect his work. I've enjoyed some of the homes that he's put up. I especially like the one, I think it was one of his earlier ones. It has more of a barnwood look and has a couple of towers. I can't remember. It's the northeast corner of maybe Scranton and Glen. Is that where it is? I like that one. He's put up a few more since that have more contemporary lines, stark black and white lines, metal roofs. My feeling on those homes is that they're starting to look a little like fraternal twins. There are several of them in town now. I think it would be nice to have a more historic-looking home on that property if we end up losing this battle and losing this old home. Something more in keeping with the the architecture of the original house, if not maybe even a creative copy of it, which has been done before and is one of the ways to alleviate the concerns and sadness of those of us around it who value these old homes. To value these homes is to value the stories and the history in the community, and also the relationships, the neighborhood around us, and just the humanity that is spoken to through respect and communication and thoughtfulness as we proceed in these actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there someone else? Yes.
My name's Stephanie Bjork, and I wasn't going to speak either, but I sent a letter that I know is in your packet. And my husband and I own 414 East Prospect, which is, to my understanding from our surveyor's research, is the last of the 25-foot lots on the original plat that has never been subdivided or changed. We owned 415 across the street and became friends with the owners of 414, who called us to help pack up when they were selling the house. And the day that their moving van pulled out to head to Colorado, it was 2006. The market was getting very difficult. They had already purchased a home that they were going to close on the next day, and their deal fell through. And I called my husband and said, is it okay if we buy the house? He feels that it's closer than driving to Lake Geneva to watch football. And so it was done as much as sense of community as anything. 414 for the previous owners, they hired Skidmore architects to take the house off at the base, to completely hand dig and re-pour a new foundation, and were, as you can imagine, terribly upside down when the downturn happened. And but they did the most magnificent job of saving the house and preserving the house, and it is a wonderful house. It is 1,425 square feet. My son and his wife recently moved out. They were there for the last 5 years with their 2 children. They bought a house on Briar, a larger house, but you have to, from our perspective, you have to be rather careful to tell people what isn't acceptable to live in, because it's a lovely house. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, full finished basement, and I'm very proud of it. And I'm very proud that the money was put in, and at least for my lifetime, so much money has been put in, and now more money is going to go in because water issues underneath have cracked the foundation in half, and it will now have to be completely redone. We are so far upside down, I can barely look at my husband, but it's important. We started our family here when our son was born in Lake Bluff in a little apartment over on Washington, 11 East Washington. Our rent was $200, and we had the most lovely landlord who took pity upon us and only raised the rent $10 a year after the first couple of years, and my husband swore he was never leaving. It was his place. So all this is to say I appreciate the difficult job, and I appreciate my neighbors. I told Drew Irwin this morning that if there's good to come out of this, those of us who've just in passing waved, I barely knew names, I barely knew nothing else about people except that we all lived in the same neighborhood. And when push came to shove, we do what we need to do for each other, and this has been a lovely time to find out that everybody cares as much as we care, and it's not considered wrong to do what we've all done. So I also want you to know that the immediate next-door neighbor to this house at 415 is an older, very lovely woman who is up north and cannot be here. I think she's the most impacted house by this. Her retaining wall for her house encroaches 1.5 feet into this property. I've asked Mr. Irwin to at least address for her how those issues are going to be handled for her in terms of the structural integrity of her house, which is listed on your historic surveys as significant. So I think there's a lot of issues in play here as well. Our house is listed in books, and I think there is some very real disputes in terms of the surveys and statements that have been made in terms of the facts. I understand Mr. Irwin has been given advice by the attorney, and I told him that we've gotten different advice from a different attorney, and both of us laughed today that that's what makes the world go around, is that lawyers have different opinions. So I appreciate everybody's time, and I know how difficult this is, and I hope, I think something magnificent can be done with what's there. That's my personal hope, and if that's not the intent, and if there isn't a profit motive involved, give somebody else a chance. My husband and I looked at that house before it sold to this gentleman, seriously considered doing another project. And so I disagree with your comment that it's tear it down or nothing. I think somebody else could come in and love it if this gentleman doesn't want to. And God knows we've got houses in town for sale. So I appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you. We have, is there anyone else who hasn't spoken who would like to? Yeah. And then we can go back.
Hi, my name is Renee Boyle, and I live at 402 East Prospect. One of the pictures in the slideshow was of my home. I'm about a block over, and I have the house that was also one of the original settlers, had an addition with no backyard. So I was perfectly aware of how the house sat and the restrictions moving forward if I was ever to do anything. As far as I'm concerned and what I was told, I was maxed out. Now I see homes with lesser lots that are much larger. So I have issue with all the comments on how it sits on the lot because it's okay with me. I paid for it, you paid for your home. As far as maybe a bad business decision or asking this board for your help, we have also made bad business decisions based on information that other people had told us regarding our property at 345 East Sheridan Road. It's a 2,800 square foot, 4-bedroom, 4-bath ranch on about 0.4 acre. On the east side, there's a 4,900 square foot home whose water keeps going over the retaining wall. They elevated it against city wishes, and they just kept paying the fines. It came to where they wouldn't where they're able to move in until they finish some things. On the other side, a house burnt down, and I went through 2 different constructions. So my concern is with all these new builders, I'm not pointing fingers on you as far as for-profit. Both builders on both sides actually lived in their homes, and then one sold it after the fire or foreclosure, something of that sort. But going back to Stephanie's point, if it's not what you planned, there will be people that will buy it. So sell it. It's a bad market, but there's people in this neighborhood that may be interested in the home because you got it really cheap. And my property values will drop if there's 2 houses on there which the city acknowledged. I'm sandwiched between two big houses on Sheridan Road. There's a spec house that's probably going to be there for a year without siding that looks horrible. I don't believe the garage was well thought out according to code. It's just off as far as the streetscape. So my thing that I'm asking you all to slow down, perhaps put a moratorium on tear downs, or spec homes. We have no idea if this will end up being a spec home or not. We don't know. We don't. So take your time. You all love this village and you're here for a reason. If you can't do what you want to do with that, then let it go. You have more letters than are here of people on your street that want to save that house. If it's not for you, then sell it. That's all I have to say tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else for the first time?
I will note parenthetically that we've been described as one of the coldest and hottest real estate markets in Chicago in the last year. So it may be a very good or a very bad market. Don't find out.
Mr. Nguyen?
So I have just a few comments. I'm going to address kind of points that were made, and then I'm going to want to focus most of what I say on options, because I think that's the right question to ask. So first, Mr. Schuster, I agree with you that we can't treat non-residents differentially from residents. All that I'm asking for is that you treat existing residents equal to prospective residents. I think you owe us that. Second point I'll make is I do know who lived in that house before, and I will tell you the most immediate prior owners was a family of four. It was the Smiths. They had two daughters. The reason why I know that, my daughters babysat their daughters. So that house was is a very nice house. It accommodated them, and I know the Smiths very well. They would not have had their two little girls in that house if the foundation were crumbling and it was in bad disrepair as represented. So here's what I'd ask. The commission really needs to get the facts, not just rely on what the applicant says, what I say, what anybody else here says. Get the facts. What is the condition of the house? How much will it cost to repair it? So that's another point. Our home, as you know, we've spent a lot of money on that. Probably almost close to $500,000. So is it that we're saying new people that come into this community, knowing the age and possible conditions of our homes, are excused from the obligation that all of us have undertaken to maintain the history and architectural integrity of our home without even telling you and showing you how much it's going to cost? And if it's $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000, I tell you it's no more than what any of us has probably put into our homes, and certainly I can tell you with ours, that's it. Yeah, for sure, it was infinitely more expensive to do what we did to our home. Infinitely more expensive. But we love the property. Mr. Bergman, we love the history of that home. I've researched it extensively. We even incorporated one of the artesian pools from the old hotel into our back landscaping. It's a beautiful home. We love it. Couple more points. The houses that Mr. Halla, and if I pronounce your name wrong, I'm sorry, I'll just say applicant, described in there, described as having been built, those were all built prior to the current municipal code. In fact, the one immediately across the street from us, which is 500 Moffett, that was the house that caused a lot of consternation in this village, and in fact led to the survey that was completed in 1998. I know that well. So the argument is, in essence, because you let this through once or twice, you have to keep letting it through. I don't even have to address the fallacy of that argument. All I have to do is state it. Again, if due diligence was done, like all of us, we have to accept our actions. So if it was done, he should have known. And now let's get to the options. The options, I think, are twofold. There are options for the applicant and there's options for the commission. So for the applicant, I think the options are really two. First option is one that my fellow neighbors have said, which is if they do not feel prepared to take on the challenge of this historic home and the cost of that, then sell it. Give someone else the chance to do that. Second option is to undertake the cost and present this commission with the cost so that we can try to preserve this home. Those are the two options. Now the options for the commission. The options for the commission to delay this, and I think that's the right thing to do here. There are a lot of facts that are not yet resolved, and I think for the right reason, but also for the legal reason, getting those facts appropriately documented in the record is the commission's obligation. I think the second option for the commission, and these are not mutually exclusive, is to really think about the code you have, the rules you have, the code of the village, and if you think it's not serving the interest and the purpose of this commission and the essence of this village, propose a change. Propose a change. I think it's easy to say we don't have authority, we can't do this, but we can. We can make those changes to preserve the history of the village. And even if we haven't done it in the past, the time is now. We can't let more and more of these historic homes be torn down. Each of those in that, there was a home there before, a historic home. Each of those were torn down. And just because we've let it happen to date doesn't mean we have to continue to let it happen. So those, I think, are the options. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, a couple of thoughts. Just again to reiterate, the authority of the commission, in this particular case, where we have a demolition request for a 50-year-old plus structure, is to review that application and do one of three things. One is make a determination that the structure is not potentially eligible for landmark status, which is the whole reason for doing the delay, and therefore terminate the review. I believe that's unlikely given the comments of the commissioners. The second is to take no action on the demolition delay, which will expire in 90 days, which is October 17, 2018. That would give the commission and the village and neighbors and the applicant an opportunity to document more of the social history and the structural history and the builder and all the rest on the particular structure, and also the dialogue, and I'll get to that in a second, about options, and I think there may be a couple. The third, and I think candidly that's the most likely action of this commission tonight. The third is we do have the authority to extend the demolition delay for another 30 days. There's no reason to do that now, since we'll be meeting twice between now and the end of that potential 90-day period. So unless I hear an objection, I'll indicate for the minutes that the sense of the commission is that we take no action on the demolition delay, and we proceed with gathering the information that is necessary to continue documentation of the structure, if that's acceptable to all.
I'm sorry, Steve, did you say 90 days?
90 days.
I thought we had an option to delay for 180 days.
We have 90 days, and then to the degree that we need additional time, we can go back and do another 30.
Another 90
and that's
days,
at our
okay.
discretion.
Another 30.
Another 30.
Up to 120.
Up to 120.
180 is advisory review. So if this was a landmark, you have different set of timeframes.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm not precluding that
Can
we
I ask a
would...
question about that?
Yeah.
If we did choose to decide that it is something that could be landmarked, then does that time period start from the landmark over again? Or is that a...
I'll let... We had talked about that before.
Well, so to begin with, yeah, so I think the first thing, and maybe it was just the way that you phrased it, but I want to make sure that everybody here is clear, that the decision to landmark is not one that's really done by this body, is in this process. So what you're doing at this stage is just simply allowing call it the waiting period to go forward, and and then the question becomes, is an application filed for landmark status? If the application is filed, it goes through the process, and it is landmarked, then it sets off, once it achieves landmark status, a different process, which is the advisory review period, and that's where the up to 180 days comes in. So there would be several intervening steps before that ever got to that point. But from where you're at tonight, I think, the chair is correct that of the three options that you have.
Okay, and I did
yeah.
misstate that a little.
No, but,
So
yeah.
just for everyone to know then, we can't, as a commission, landmark a property, but there are other,
Yes, we can.
we can.
We
well,
can,
Is that what you were?
the
So let's
commission-
clarify that.
The commission, when the commission receives an application, the commission makes a recommendation for landmarking, if that's the decision. The village board makes the actual decision.
Right.
There are 4 entities under the ordinance that can submit an application for historic preservation. We are one of them.
Okay.
The village board is another. The applicant is the third, and the Lake Bluff History Museum,
Is the
which was called the Vliet Museum of History. Vliet Museum?
Vliet Museum.
Vliet Museum, just Vliet Museum.
For Lake Bluff area history.
Thank you. Is the fourth. So one of the reasons that this delay is built into the village ordinance is to allow those nominating bodies an opportunity to review the facts and potentially come forward to this body with an application for landmark.
Good.
I do want to make it clear, though, that if that would happen, if there would be an application for landmark, if that would go through the process that's in the ordinance, if the village board would agree, if we would recommend and the village board would agree, there is still nothing in the ordinance that would prevent the property owner from demolishing the structure. That's the way the ordinance is established. There's been lots of discussion around that in the past. Many of us were part of those original discussions 20 years ago, and those discussions bubble up every now and then when a situation like this occurs. But I just want to make it clear that the ultimate, the policy in the village, the ordinance in the village, is that a property owner can do what that property owner wishes to do with their property. And so the most that could happen is a delay. That delay, if it is landmark, could be fairly significant. But the ultimate right to do what the property owner wants to do is with the property owner, the way the ordinance stands right now. So if we're all in agreement for the second option, and that is to delay, take no action on the demolition delay today, which means it'll come before us next month. I do have some comments primarily directed to the property owner, and thank you. And we realize this is an important decision for you. It's certainly an economic decision. It's a hard decision to make. But we would, and part of our responsibility is, to think, to ask questions that may not be comfortable asking, but we'd ask you to think. So as I see it, there are three options that potentially you can consider. It's actually 4. One is selling the property and moving on. I'm not sure that's a viable option for you, but that certainly is an option. There's always demolition. That's the route that you're apparently going on now. And again, that is your right as part of the village code. There's also some options that you've examined in the past, and I'd ask you with your architect to think again about how can the core of that existing structure be integrated into a replacement. So if we're, by the way, as I think you know, I like the way the house is situated. I like the big open space in front. But if you're going to do something with that and that space won't be there, what can you do, what can we do to help you think through what makes the most sense in the context of the neighborhood? Because historic preservation really is not just the structure, it's not just the property, it's the context. It's the context of all of those things that makes up the nature of the village. So what could you do that potentially could retain a core of that existing structure integrated into a home that you would want to build? Is that even an option? Is that economically feasible? We'd ask you, and that's part of the purpose of the delay, we'd ask you to think about that and work with your architect to think through that. Alternatively, and/or in conjunction with, I'll go back to what I said earlier on. The village has no authority for reviewing residential property design. We don't have design standards. We have building code standards, which obviously you would need to follow. But again, we think it might be helpful to get other inputs, not in a contentious manner, but to get, if you are going to put something there, if you are going to tear down what's there and put something else there, perhaps a few more eyes on some thoughts when the design is still fresh, when it's not set in stone, when it doesn't take whatever it takes for architecture charges to have a whole new set of plans, and they get to be fairly thick. We would, I know all of us would certainly welcome the opportunity to have that conversation with you. We've all seen, I've been in this village a long time. We've been in here since, moved in here in 1975. And in that time, we've seen a lot of teardowns, and quite candidly, a lot of really nice, attractive homes that have been replaced. And we've seen a handful of ones that you just wish something else would have happened. So we'd like to see the former rather than the latter, and if we can do this cooperatively as a community, I think we'll all be much better served.
I appreciate your pardon me, I appreciate your comments, and I'll work through with Glenn on how the mechanics of something like that can be accomplished. As an architect, I'm always wary of design by committee, but I think conversations are certainly we're open to having conversations. I'll conclude with, I'd like to thank Glenn and his staff. The staff here is very professional and very friendly to people trying to work through the process. And I also appreciate the tone. While we may disagree, I appreciate the tone of the comments from the committee, and appreciate the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can add one comment to Steve's comment, we've worked with several homeowners on their replacement homes, and we've had some splendid results in doing that. And several of them were in the slideshow that was put on this evening. We've had some splendid results by having a bit of community discussion about replacement homes. So it's not, when you say by committee, I understand the pitfalls there, but we've had some wonderful responses to the point where kids coming back to the village for reunions and whatnot don't realize the house they're looking at is a replacement house for what was originally there.
And I think that's
there's a lot of value in what Steve is talking about.
And I think that's a very fair point. And despite the dispersions cast upon our character tonight, we are looking to build a home for ourselves and for our family. I'd like to think that the body of work I've developed over the last 20 to 30 years would indicate that we do appreciate quality architecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take a 5-minute recess before we move on to agenda item number 5.
Okay.
So the agenda item number 5 is the continued discussion of our choosing Lake Bluff as a destination document. And thank you to our editors who have some edits and comments on the document. Here's what I would like to do with this. I would like to get a sense from this group tonight, if we can, that in general, we think this is a good direction to put forth as a platform for reimagining historic preservation in the village, for reimagining what the role of the village is in defining the history of Lake Bluff. So if we can do that, and I have some thoughts here around where we get this information, I'd sort of like to take to the village administrator and the village president as a first impression draft, if we get through this tonight. Otherwise, we won't till next month. Here's kind of the concepts of interventions. Here's who we think, where we're going to get this and who's responsible for this. And get some very real-time feedback, because some of this is going to require dollars and cents, most likely in terms of people, and whether that's grants or whether it's working with other entities in the village, or working with staff, either temporary or full-time staff or part-time staff for the village. I'd like to get that discussion going sooner rather than later.
I have a question for Glenn, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but I haven't done any research into Main Street America programs in quite some time, but it seems to me that there's components of this that look very much like the Main Street program that we have in the, I think it's sponsored by the federal government but funded by the states. And I know at one point I was very much, I was looking at the Main Street program that they have in Libertyville, which is a 10-year project that they worked on, or perhaps even longer. But I'm wondering, do you know much about the Main Street America program?
I haven't seen any references to it dated within the last few years.
I thought it was dead.
I don't know if it's alive or not.
Okay.
I mean, I'd say as a general comment, whenever we were talking about grants, especially federal grants or state grants, one thing that always works against us is we're kind of on paper, we're the most fiscally able to do a lot of stuff compared to a lot of our competition. A lot of times we're hoping that basically there's not other people looking for the money.
Yeah.
That's not true for transportation. That's not true for a few things, but that's sort of the general caveat I like to make people aware of. Doesn't mean we can't compete, though.
In the back of my mind, I was thinking that there might be a little bit, just, any little drips or drabs of grant money is, sorely...
Pennies from heaven.
Pennies from heaven, yes.
Yeah, but in order to even ask for grant money, we have to know what we want to do and how much it's going to cost. So I think we need to go through that exercise so that we have a sense of what we're asking for. And then we can prioritize and start to figure out how we make this happen. Does that make sense? So what I'd like to kind of do is go through this one more time. And Sherry and Janie, thank you for your comments. And if you could insert your comments to mine. So I have just slightly modified the first two paragraphs. I'll just read it. It's wordsmithing, and I'll probably wordsmith it again, but let me just read it. There are at least 3 opportunities to encourage a home buyer to consider the village of Lake Bluff. Do you want a new one? Do you want a blank here?
No, I got it. I got the right one.
There are at least 3 opportunities to encourage a home buyer to consider the village of Lake Bluff. At each of these reflection points, village-provided information can influence both the decision to invest in Lake Bluff and the mode of that investment. Revitalization of an existing structure.
That's not what mine says.
Or building of a new one. I just did it about an hour. I did it
I
about
thought
2.5.
you meant that it
No,
was
I
on
did it
your-
about 2.5 hours ago. I just wanted to give you
Got
the
it.
flavor. And I'll get, well, before
We'll start over, because I've been looking for it.
Yeah, me too.
That's right, village provided, me too.
Okay, there are at least 3 opportunities to, and I apologize, I didn't get to this in time, but There are at least 3 opportunities to encourage a home buyer to consider the Village of Lake Bluff. At each of these reflection points, village-provided information can influence both the decision to invest in Lake Bluff and the mode of that investment, revitalization of an existing structure or building of a new one. This document introduces these moments and outlines possible communication tools. It is intended as the beginning of a discussion that will hopefully define historic and preservation in the context of modern Lake Bluff. Okay?
Good.
So the first of the 3 is, I'm thinking of buying a home, how to encourage investment in Lake Bluff. We have really 2 pieces to it. One is background. Lake Bluff is a place to live. My thought is that, having come from another village body that was pulling all of this stuff together, that most of this is being gathered for the revised comprehensive plan. Correct? Housing market, demographics, education, natural environment, so statistics, maybe attributes and amenities that would have to be touched up, but the beginning point would be the basics of the comp plan. Now he's got to look. Would you like the paper copy?
No. I had someone's letter pulled up. I closed the wrong file.
So that's where I would suggest most of that would come from. And there's some really interesting stuff in the natural environment, by the way. When you look at open space, both passive and active open space and parkland,
The percentage is huge.
it's 50%. It's 50% of the village, which is pretty astounding.
Not in my neighborhood anymore.
Well, yeah.
Okay?
You guys had questions of access when you were doing your editing. I really mean access. It's convenient. You can commute. That's a code for you can commute to the city, but you're also close to O'Hare, close to a handful of big multinational corporations, so that you can live here and work here locally if you want. You can work in the city, or you can, like some of us used to do, get on airplanes every week and all live in one place. That's what I meant by access.
You know,
You could even work in Milwaukee.
yeah, I was just going to say, you're closer to Milwaukee, and it's a much better airport.
Well, actually, you're not closer.
Well, you're not closer, but it's...
Faster.
Faster.
It's faster, but it's
Except
something
with the
else.
construction for Foxconn right now.
Huh?
Driven up there lately, the highway construction
Yeah.
for putting
You know,
Foxconn in is...
every summer.
Well, they're always doing that, but they do that everywhere.
Yeah, but I agree, that's where I go.
Yeah, anyway, something that occurred to me is when we moved to this town, and it hasn't changed, you don't go to Lake Bluff on the way to any place else.
I thought of that. That.
You don't,
that-
it's not like Libertyville, you're going, you
It's
know,
a destination in
beauty of
itself.
it is the
Yes,
destination.
exactly right, exactly. And Lake Forest is,
I didn't hear what you said.
You don't go to Lake Bluff on your way someplace else. It's not, it's, you can't, you know, you come in and you dead end here if you're coming in 176. If you're on Sheridan Road, it's kind of like not a main thoroughfare. Most main
well,
thoroughfare
there's
is
some through
Waukegan
traffic
Road.
on, you
You
know,
don't
on-
have that traffic.
yeah.
So, you know, I can make an argument that is the lead-in sentence for the amenities section of this.
Yeah, I
It
like
is a-
that
You know?
sentence.
Even if you're going to the Jewel or wherever in Lake Forest, it's all back
No, we all go to
roads.
the Heinens
Heinens?
in Lake Bluff, yes.
Yeah. don't
We need your
even have
tax
to
money, please, stay here.
Stay here.
But I like that, and I think
Yeah.
you know, you could build an amenity section.
And so that was like almost my idea about location. I was questioning, I didn't necessarily understand what you meant with access. That was Janie's question, but
Right.
I thought location needed to be addressed not only because of all the access, but also because and the natural environment's part of that too, but what you're saying, it's a
Well, you can
little
make a whole
hidden
story
gem,
too, because,
and-
you know, as those of us that either had or still take the train many days of the week, when you get off in Lake Bluff, you're in a different place.
Yeah.
When you get off in some of the other suburbs down the road a piece, you're in a not so different place. You know, you're not
Yeah.
in the city, but it doesn't look like it looks here.
Right. So.
Okay.
more rural than, or it looks more rural than it is.
Yeah.
It's true, yeah.
It looks ex-urban. It's not suburban, it's not
That's
rural,
what I mean,
it's
yeah,
ex-urban.
I prefer pastoral myself.
A pastoral is a nice way to describe it, but
Yes.
Okay. So that's the first piece. Second piece is past, present, and future. So in thinking about this today, again, I was thinking, so current environment and past. So the current environment is really, what's the pull? Why does our target demographic want to live here? And they want to live here because of what it is, because you're not on your way to someplace else when you stumble upon Lake Bluff, because we have a family focus, we've got a vision, we've got a stable, whatever words we want to use. But schools are also an important part of this, which you guys mentioned in your comments. Much of this can come from the 2023 strategic plan, because that's kind of what was done here as a background. So again, I don't think we need to recreate a lot of this.
Plus, we wordsmithed that for 6 months.
Yeah.
So
But
quick question, Steve.
Yeah.
And this might just be outline format question, but all of the background, which is so important, wouldn't that just also fit under current environment? If you're going to do past, present, and future, would
Yeah.
that be part of current?
It could, although I was looking at the background as more statistics, and the Lake Bluff past, present, and future as more almost philosophical.
Okay.
Uh,
That wouldn't be.
The aesthetic rather than the statistics. What it, we can tell you all about the great schools, and we can tell you all about all the parks we have,
Okay.
and our,
So it
all.
wouldn't be numbers, it'd be more descriptions.
It would be
of
more,
where we're at.
so think of family focus, as a kind of a way to think
I
through
think of
that.
bullet points versus a paragraph. So you have,
Yeah.
you have all of the, under A, you have just bullet points of did it, and then under B, you have full sentences
Yeah.
of statement.
And then I'm looking at Lake Bluff's past as, so if the current environment is the pull of the present, then the Lake Bluff past section is the pull of the past. It, in my view, should be designed and be read by individuals who are looking for this kind of place, for people who are looking for this kind of physical environment as well as social environment. And that's the,
Much like our audience tonight.
so that would be right up front. Here is who we are. Now,
Everybody was here for many, many years.
the description of neighborhoods, and there were questions around, are we going to designate historic districts? No, we're not, because I don't think we need to. I think we can designate neighborhoods. Historic districts are a defined thing in the HPC, and those have to be approved by the village board. I would prefer that we identify neighborhoods that can be large or small, that would be identifiers of places of significance within the village. That would not need to be, at this point, historic districts. They maybe will turn into that at some point. So we talked I think it was last month, Paul, didn't we talk about the farm that used to be, what's the, right off where Sheridan Road goes from north-south to east-west,
Yeah, I can't think of the name of the street. I never knew who owned, there was a little
The
farm.
Indian Hills?
Indian Hill.
Indian Hill. I mean, that's a planned development that used to be a farm. That would be a neighborhood, so we could write up a little thing, just have a little thing, but that's Indian Hill. The Artist and Writers Colony is a neighborhood, but within that neighborhood, there's subgroupings, So, not to use my house, but to use my house, there's a story about, the Swift and then the stable in the backyard.
Janet and I looked at establishing the West Lake Bluff neighborhood to
Right.
talk about
I've got all that stuff.
farm space.
Absolutely.
That is now a great deal of the golf course and where the school is, and how that was open farm acreage. We did a Distinguished Home Award out there for a house built in about the 1860s, and we came up with a picture of the house. There's a barn, and then there must be a 40 or 50-foot high haystack next to it, and you're thinking, wow, rural Lake Bluff. And you just looked at it, and you're just agog at this old photograph.
Is that the
So-
red house that's on the
So
south
one,
side? Yeah.
one of the things that Susan Benjamin is doing, and that was approved by the board, and she's actually out working now, but one of the
And
things,
Thank you for
She's-
pushing that through.
she's,
Susan will do a wonderful job.
she will, and the focus is really on the terraces, and there's a social history involved with the terraces as well. It's not yet so much the structures, it's much more the context of how they were built post-World War II, development. So that's what I mean by neighborhoods. And then I think we can, we in conjunction with the History Museum and perhaps using resources, graduate students in history or urban planning who would love projects to give us, there's a whole story to be written about railroads in Lake Bluff. There's a story to be written certainly at the camp meeting. There are all kinds of interesting resources. The Lake County map that we've been looking at periodically, if you filter through some of those, you can see the 1871 rendering of the townships that made up Lake Bluff, and you go 20 years further, and you actually get ownership of particular lots. There's a 1929 aerial photograph of Lake Bluff, where you can actually see things as they develop. So there's all kinds of things that we can do there. The future, I'm not sure, that probably comes from the 2023 strategic plan, since that's really was the focus of what that plan is. But that's sort of, I'm thinking of buying a home. I don't think this stuff is controversial at all. I think it's just basic background that shouldn't be all that difficult to get if we have resources that are actually focused on it and direction that we can give them. So the second part becomes much more interesting, and that's the I want in. I want to be in Lake Bluff, and this is all around expectations of buying a home. So what are you getting into when you want to live in Lake Bluff? Now we got you hooked. What are you getting into? So the biggest part of this is actually A2. It's Lake Bluff Online. It's the building off of the Evanston Historic District and creating a whole bunch of overlays and integrating all the information we have from the historic surveys and what the History Museum has and the village has and individuals have. I think I gathered everybody was pretty excited about the opportunities to do that. It's not technically hard. The hosting of the website is already done. The base map is there. It's actually translating and getting the information from one format to another and then enhancing it. And we could also make it possible, I don't know about you guys, but I've had 3 major additions on my house, and I've got the plans from each one of those. Might be cool to have a link to those plans on this website so that a future property owner could actually download them.
I have ours too.
That's
Yeah,
easy to
really?
do. It's easy to do. It's just getting somebody to do it. So
Well,
that's
that's a place where it's really, I think, very important for us to see if we can put some money toward it or a grant.
I
or
would-
something.
I agree.
That's a really good one.
I agree. I think there's a couple of things here, and I think it's the commission, it's the village, and it's the History Museum thinking through what kind of resources that we have and organizing and just getting this done. This is a couple-year effort, I think, to make this happen.
Steve, I kind of see this as a hook,
Yeah.
because it's a fun toy.
Yeah.
It sure is.
And I don't think you have the all at once, the wherewithal to get it all done at once.
Oh, no.
So do it piecemeal, Maybe it's just,
I knew this day was going to come.
from the park to the lake.
I want to show you how more
Steve,
cool
you
it
just
is.
like this way too much.
Well, I don't think you can even come close to saying it's a piecemeal project. This is just an ongoing evolutionary project.
Right.
You start today, and you just keep digging
just
the
go
trench.
down the street.
You just keep digging the trench, because...
But don't
at
wait
some-
till it's all done.
Don't
before
wait
you
till it's
put
all
a house
done,
over
and
it.
don't think of perfection, because
Well,
at
we-
some point, a set of drawings is going to fall out of the sky, and you're going to say, oh, it goes over here, and you're going to do this or that. I mean, this is just something that just keeps
The
grown
never-ending
organically
Yep.
over time.
We need organization, structure, process, responsibility, review, we need all those things to be put in place, and we need some money, most likely, to make that happen.
What is that?
The piece before that are written resources, and I think this is, much of this we have and just needs to be formatted. So when you, so there's information on the village, on schools and the park district. I'm not sure there's a nice brochure that describes the village and the village services, but that's something we use with our community partners. Let's see.
Is this the one you'd like, or would you like the bigger one?
I want the one that somehow has all of the thumbnails over on the right side. Where'd the thumbnails go?
Oh.
There, okay. Crap, which one is it? Go, so go to the just flip on those and see what you get.
Go to
No, not that,
Go
not
to
that.
419 Prospect. What do you
not
got?
that.
That's what I was going to say.
There, go down, keep going down. So, go down, go to the 1861, that one.
Oh,
This is the actual township
Wow.
map, which shows ownership of the segments in the township from 1861. And then go to the 1948 aerial.
So who set this all up already?
This is county, this is just GIS, this is, yeah. So this is what Lake Bluff, okay, so over on the left side, that's, right there's the underpass, and just follow that through, go up a little bit north. Right, what's that? Why is that open space? What was that?
That's the farm.
No,
That's-
farmer's further north.
At Crabtree?
No,
no.
I don't think so. Maybe it is. I don't know.
Is that piece that stops, is that Woodland? Is that before Moffett goes all the way up to Crabtree Farm?
I don't know. But anyway, that's enough now. We don't want to get too enamored with this tool. But there's all kinds of cool stuff on this if you actually figure out all the...
Something wrong here.
See, so
Artesian Lake already gone?
Artesian Lake is gone.
And the
And
baseball
this is
field is there.
1861.
Already a ball field.
This is,
Yeah.
this is 1946.
No, I was going to
It's not
say.
1800.
It's 46.
They had ball fields.
So I just wondered so if you go up, that's not, so you can see the demarcation of where the farm starts, but I don't know what that space is, unless I'm...
What's that
That's where
street?
Blodgett.
Oh, that's
Yeah, what's that
Crabtree.
street right below it?
Yeah, no, that's the
You
farm.
click on that?
Which one are you
Right,
looking
that
for?
one
This
right there, what street is that?
Unfortunately, this is 1946 technology, so you can't zoom
Yeah.
into
I
it.
don't think Blodgett was there.
Anyway, okay, now take that off, so we
Blodgett
don't
is a
get...
gravel
I knew
road
I
at
shouldn't
that
have done this.
Was it even there?
Well, that's East Washington, right in the middle of it.
Crazy Mary lived
So
there.
that wouldn't be Crabtree Farm.
Her
It wouldn't
house
be
goes in
Crabtree,
at
I
about
No,
39.
that must be, oh, I see Blodgett up there on
Way up
top
there.
of it.
Okay, so look...
That must just be
So there's
undeveloped
Blodgett
land.
right there.
Yeah.
So that's not Crabtree,
Yeah.
that's something else.
Yeah, Crabtree's right on the other side of it.
That's where Washington ends and you go down to the beach, and
Yeah.
isn't that's just like a,
Yeah.
it's almost like a park area?
And see, my street, Woodland, with the street that's got that little dip in it,
Yeah.
ends. And as you walk down the street, suddenly the curbs end, and at one point, that was a gravel connector over to the nascent, the Moffett Road that didn't exist.
That's the closed brickyard.
Is it
Closed
really?
Brickyard.
This is
Labeled closed.
It's in the original, this is the camp meeting plot, but it's labeled a closed property. Okay, take it off, otherwise we're going to go through this now.
See how much fun it is?
I know, go back through this. Okay, so now we're back on 2A, Explore Lake Bluff through written resources. So basics, we have to go to the village partners, we have to give them a format so that they will do that. The real estate community in terms of financial commitment, if we want that. So, knowing about Lake Bluff is knowing what you got to pay, right? There's a tax bill analysis also that needs to happen as part of that. Sense of community, this is a good opportunity to go and talk with someone, to go to talk with all of the nonprofits, all the clubs and social groups, and get all that documented and get all that in a nice document. History, we may not need because we've got that on the preceding page. Governance, I'm not sure people are that interested in governance, but it might be nice to know the opportunities and the opportunities for serving the village, et cetera.
Yeah, I added that under the sense of community because
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's a good thing for everyone to
The
know they
links
can
and
do.
references are to do exactly what we just did. So we should be able to link to all of this stuff that's there. We can find more stuff, I'm sure. We can link to the History Museum's website, which is in the process of getting the entire catalog online. There's a lot of stuff already there. Hopefully, there'll be a lot more stuff that's there that's researchable, searchable, and integrated into the property. So my vision is you click on your house or your potential house, you get the basic information, and you get links that can take you to the county information.
Okay, so we know about the links.
Yeah.
Okay, my clock is running very quickly here.
We're gonna-
so
we're
We
gonna-
can read this, but where else are we going to go with this?
Let me finish.
Okay,
I won't take that long.
good.
So,
We all
under
know about
B,
links.
I found the perfect place. So much of that is now packaging Lake Bluff Online. It's creating the dossier that hopefully the real estate community will agree to include as part of the material that they give to prospective buyers of a property. Let me take you, let's look at this property on Lake Bluff, and oh, by the way, here's information on that property that the village has provided, and websites that you can look at. And then also, just like there is in Lake Forest, attached to sales contracts, there's understanding of how development occurs in Lake Bluff. What processes like this, what really happens. So then we go down two paths. I'm interested in rehabilitation, and here we become more policy-driven. I said to this group, and I'll continue to say it, that if we're really interested in rehabilitation, we should make this as inexpensive to a interested property owner as possible. I start from the premise that someone who wants to rehab a structure, and again, there's what is the structure, what is the percentage of rehab, is it something that was built in the 1990s? But you don't pay anything. You pay nothing to the village. There are no fees. Everything is waived. You get a 7-year freeze on your Lake Bluff portion of your tax bill, for example. You get zoning flexibility that is codified if we can do it. Otherwise, series of understandings as to what can happen. There's also things we've done before around information on county, state, federal landmark incentives. There's some new stuff from the state. We may want to include architects and builders familiar with Lake Bluff. That may be controversial, I'm not sure. Then on the second side, I'm interested in new construction. We then go down to 3, I want to build my new home, and that's where a lot of the discussion, I think, is going to occur, because under this scheme, there's a strict application of village ordinances. The ABR recommendations around quality building materials and around building site reviews would be implemented, and there would be included in this suggestions on context, much of the discussions that we had tonight. So some of the things that some of us have thought would be nice to have may have some teeth attached to them. That's it.
Thank you, I think it's good.
Yeah, I did too.
A question from Mr. Wynn's comments. Was here earlier. This is all focused on the new person coming here. How does this support the person who's been here go around this table, 20, 30, however many years?
It would, yeah, it would apply to them as well.
Because we keep talking about new houses and rehabilitating and whatnot. and-
Let's just call that artistic license in making this flow, but the intent is that it would apply anytime you would have a
I mean,
blank slate.
If we show this to him, I'm just anticipating his question.
And just for kicks, Paul, and I don't know, I haven't researched this, you tell me, how many demolition requests have come before this group by people that have already lived in their house 30 years? I can't think of any.
There are not that many, but there are quite a few demolition requests that came from people who have lived in Lake Bluff for a long period of time, are buying a new property and want to build a new home. So it's a different subset, but at least for now, the intent is that it applies anytime you want to have a blank slate.
He's talking about, he put a, for all of his comments, he said he put $500,000 into his house over the term of his being here. How is this for him also? So, yep. I have carpenters showing up at my house on Monday to put in new windows, so.
I was shocked at how much it cost to get my outside trim, not even the house, but the trim painted. Scraped and
Yowza.
painted.
Yeah.
Other thoughts? Bob, you okay with this?
Yeah, I think I told you last time, don't try and do everything at once because there's too much.
That's, yeah, I don't think any of us have any, suffer from the illusion that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But
And the format in which it's finally done, we've been talking about getting in touch with the real estate community, doing this, that, and the other thing. We've got pamphlets down there on HPC. I don't know if anybody has ever picks them up, if anybody's ever interested in it. And so,
Depends on how good they are, what the content
well,
is.
even if they're great,
I mean, if there were, I would think it would be the unusual home buyer who would be given information on how to research their own home, or given a packet of information or a link or something. This is information about the home you're interested in buying, and ignore that.
Oh, if they've got it, yeah, they're not going to ignore it.
We just have to find a way to get the people who are going to hand those out to make sure that they do pass it on.
And that gets
that's the
down to the
realtor.
real estate
Right.
community.
Exactly.
No. And the real estate community changes. And there's some realtors who have been here for ages, but then there's another whole group of realtors that just, the young realtors, they just keep rolling over.
Like
and
you
stuff.
say, it's a continuous process.
So we end up having to resell ourselves and resell everything.
Well, until it becomes, if it should ever become established that this is how
this should be,
it works here.
the way, in my view, the only way this is really going to work is if the material that is developed is perceived by the real estate community as being an asset.
Yes.
In their sale of a home in Lake Bluff.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And if it's an asset, they'll use it, they'll make sure everybody has it. And
What we're ignoring, and you and I know this, is, okay, we're aging in place, but the place is going to have to change. And we're ignoring that as a village. And I don't know what the solution is there, not go down on Sheridan Place or whatever they call it. But, there's no, if I don't have $1.5 million to spend on a house that's got 6 bedrooms and, nothing on the first floor, I go someplace else. Now I go to Lake Forest because they got it all. They are nonstop over there.
So, okay, so that's just triggered a couple of gray cells rubbing together in my head. The first gray cell was, yes, the PCZBA in redoing the comp plan has thought about opportunities for development. That would not be $1.6 million or $2 million. So that's one avenue of discussion. The other that your comment just fired, the neuron fired. Is there anything that we can do within our current building code to make adapting an existing structure financially easier or process easier so that we could age in place? Are there services that can be provided in the village?
You convert the houses to Airbnb houses and rent out the second
Yeah,
floor.
I don't know.
I don't know.
But that's actually an interesting. So it would be really great if in the beginning, where we talk about current environment of family focus, that we would define family really broadly. That would include, the multi-generational concepts that were in vogue for a while and now have seemed to fade away. Okay. Are people comfortable? I would like to take this and start talking about it to people. Are you guys comfortable with me doing that?
Yes.
Okay. Then I'll do it. I'll revise this, I'll get a copy through Glenn to you guys, and then give it a week for you to take a look at it. And
Do you
then,
want any of us to do any more?
let me start the first, and then as we go further, we will need to connect. There are lots of people that we need to connect with, and I think we can divide and,
But rather than have you do all of the contact work, is there,
I'm just committing to do the first meeting.
is there a point of having you and a second member go and have conversation, a little coffee clutch things, meet at Bluffington's, however that works, but to sort of broaden out, instead of having you carrying the sword on this, of having a bunch of other people
Sure.
be involved with the process of doing that.
Sure. I think the first, I want village board approval of this concept before we spend a lot of time and intellectual effort and energy to make this happen. So that's the first step, is to get this at that level where there is not fine-tuned detail, but as a structure for thinking about the place, like Bluff the place, they're comfortable with. And then we can start putting implementation plans. So, yeah, if we can divvy up the real estate community and the community partners, and, yeah, that.
If you're starting to talk about village members, do we want to have a very vague, very light touch, but some sort of initial ask in this?
Yeah, the ask, that's kind of what I was doing here. So
No,
if we have some.
I know, I mean a money ask. to
Well,
say-
I don't think we know what the money is, but
What you say is, let me finish my point, is you say, there's this really neat website thingamajig down in Evanston.
Yeah.
And we'd like to move forward with
Yeah.
that, sort of very first and foremost.
yeah, and
What does
my-
that cost? Well,
Right.
we don't know what it costs, but it's not as big, it's not bigger than a bread box.
So I was planning on using $1, $2, and $3 signs. So that would be a $3 sign one, A lot of these are $1 signs or a cent,
Okay.
because it's grabbing from
good.
additional stuff. But yeah, so there is some sense, and there is an ask. I was perusing the historic preservation ordinance today, actually, and it specifically says that we're supposed to be doing this and recommending to the village board.
We used to have a budget for doing this.
Yeah. So we want
We
to
never
get,
spent any of it.
We never spent
I
any
don't
of
think we
it.
ever got any of it.
I think the.
Should be in a drawer
I think
someplace.
the Benjamin survey was,
Yeah, like that's
was this
gonna
year's
happen.
budget.
Maybe so.
The
But
next
it-
budget done? When do you do the next budget?
It's on a biennium cycle, so, we'll brush around the edges, probably about, it starts May 1, we'll start looking at it January, February-ish, but we won't really touch it again until that time.
Do we
2020.
request monies for the budget, or
So
how does
no,
that work?
at one point, I think when this group was first established, I don't really know the history here necessarily, maybe we were still bound up with Filet, there was one line item for this group, and they had their own budget.
Right.
It was about,
No committee in the village, including this group, has any money allocated directly to it at this point.
We get money for Susan to do the estates.
we had a line.
Yeah, we did.
We had a line item, it was just a placeholder, but I thought it was about a $10,000 placeholder that went through.
Let's,
Yeah.
I'll double check, but I believe it's
I'm thinking
it's just
that small?
blank now.
And then over the last 3 or 4 years, that's gone to zero. But when we first started doing this,
We started talking, weren't we using it for trying to do marketing and preservation? Remember, we got got preservation and all those cute little things that we did way back in the beginning?
and
Like
we
the
use it for printing the
Oh.
brochure, because we have a little trifold or something like that, which we've redone twice now or something like that, so.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there aren't resources to tap into, all I'm saying is, that,
No,
to my
we're just-
knowledge,
we're just
no
sharing.
group has its own pot of money anymore,
Okay,
but we've got pots of money.
and yes, we'll find out where they are. Okay, I will get that initial dialogue before we meet again, and we'll report back next month, and then we can put I'll try to have an action plan based on the feedback I get there. That's my report. Staff report?
We mentioned already, historic surveying's off and running, so we're very excited about that. We're working with them to finish up the instrument this week. Hope to have people out on the street perhaps as early as next week. I think there'll be a blurb about it in the print newsletter coming out to houses here in a couple weeks, and e-newsletter and so on and so forth. So very excited about that. Stay tuned. Otherwise, that would conclude my report.
And I think a copy of the proposal is attached.
Yeah, a copy of the
Yeah,
proposal is attached.
so the important piece is the map in the front. So and most of it is the same kind of survey that we've been used to. There's partly financial and partly just practical. Some of it is just documentation of Tangley Oaks. You know, when it was built, we'll identify, for Tangley Oaks, we'll certainly do a little history of what it was, what it turned into, what the estate is, and then, to the degree that we can, we'll identify the models. And we'll have information, we'll do a lot of work on the models themselves, but we really won't do the house-by-house survey at this point. We may need to do that at some point in the future, but for now, we're not. Same thing with Campbell Court and a couple other developments like that. But we'll have touched every place.
I'm sorry that we're not going to photograph
Well,
all
we're
of the
gonna
buildings.
Photograph. No, we're not.
There's a lot of photography involved, but not quite everything.
Yeah. So, because I think there's a lot more diversity out at Armor Woods than we realize.
And there's no reason
They've
that
been modified over the last
Yeah,
25 years.
they've been modifying like crazy. so.
the implication of Lake Bluff Online is that we have photographs of every structure. So to the degree we don't have them, an ask would be that
Yeah,
we
okay.
figure out how to do it.
Right, okay.
I would actually
And-
extend
Glenn's
my
lunch
report.
hour seems like a really good time to take care of that.
Well, that doesn't exist, so.
Get a hold of Google.
Actually,
They got it.
actually, I might suggest that you ask Susan Benjamin to wait about 6 or 8 weeks before she launches the photography part, because you want the leaves to fall. And what I have found in trying to photograph Stanley Anderson houses, at this time of year is
Can't see
a
'em.
terrible time to try and photograph houses. But if you do it starting in mid-October, when the leaves have fallen, suddenly the front of people's houses reappears.
Interesting thought, really, yeah, good.
I know that's come up in our discussions. I'll ask her what her plan is about that.
I don't,
Monday now.
my experience has been that, you can take a lot of pictures of green leaves and
Yeah.
not a lot of
Right
detail.
now, the survey instrument is being put together. There needs to be an understanding of the context of each of the areas, so there's some social history and stuff. So my guess is it's going to be more towards the fall, and hopefully when the leaves are down, because I hear you. Anything else?
I would actually extend my report slightly. Two things I should note. The first is, you might notice that the young Mr. John Scopoletti has graced us with his benevolent presence once again. John's
Thank you.
course schedule, John's course schedule has changed, so he'll be able to join us on Wednesday nights again, which I'm looking very forward to. The second note is, every year, the History Museum has a chance to take a small crowd into the grounds of the Crabtree Farm and Museum. That opportunity is right around the corner in the start of September, so if you're interested, you reach out to the museum, or you can let me know as well, and we'll make sure.
Or you can talk to me because
Get
I'm in
you
charge of
guys.
ticket sales.
Well, yes, you should probably do that then.
And if you haven't
It is
gone,
September
you must
20.
go.
Yeah, I've gone, but I'd love to go again.
Yeah, it's great.
It's like the third Saturday, I can tell you.
I think I've got it as
Anything
well.
else?
I should.
Anything else from anyone?
I'm not a big fan of stickler furniture. It's very.
Motion to
I'm
adjourn?
working at the museum tomorrow, I'll just look it up.
September 22nd.
Okay.
Jinx.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
My son's.
Second?
Oh, is it?
What is it, 9:18?
9:18?
9:18. Thank you.
Baby.